I spent 42 years of my life building a house. Not a house made of bricks and concrete, although I built one of those too. I am talking about a house made of beliefs, a house made of certainties, a house where every room had a name: duty, obedience, tradition, honor, submission. I knew every corner of that house. I knew where the light came in and where the shadows fell. I knew the creaks in the floor and the cracks in the walls. I had lived in that house so long that I could not imagine living anywhere else. And then, at 42 years old, that house collapsed. It did not collapse because of an earthquake or a storm or some external force. It collapsed because I pulled out one brick. Just one. A single question that I had been too afraid to ask for 4 decades. And when I pulled that brick out, I discovered that the entire structure had been held together by habit and fear, not by truth. And down it came. All of it. Every room, every wall, every certainty I had ever known. My name is Ibrahim. I am 48 years old. I am from Cairo, Egypt. I was an Imam. Yes, you heard that correctly. I was an Imam, a man who stood in front of hundreds of Muslims every Friday, leading them in prayer, teaching them the Quran, guiding them in the faith. I was the house that other people lived in. And I left. This is not a story of anger. I am not angry at Islam. I am not angry at my community. I am not angry at the decades I spent serving a faith that I ultimately walked away from. This is a story of a man who spent his whole life looking for God in a religion and finally found God outside of it. It is a story about what happens when you are honest, truly, painfully, devastatingly honest, with yourself. It is a long story, a complicated one, a story with no easy villains and no simple heroes, but it is mine. And after 6 years of silence, I am ready to tell it. I was born in the Shubra district of Cairo in 1978. Shubra is one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city. A dense, chaotic, magnificent tangle of narrow streets, crumbling buildings, street vendors, donkey carts, and the constant sound of car horns and human voices. If you have been to Cairo, you know the energy. It is a city that never sleeps, never stops, never turns down the volume. My father, Mahmoud, was a construction worker, a big man with rough hands and a booming voice. He was not educated, he could barely read, but he had a deep, instinctive faith. He prayed 5 times a day with the discipline of a soldier. He did not understand theology. He did not read scholarly commentaries. He simply believed. Islam was the ground beneath his feet, unquestioned, unexamined, solid. My mother, Samira, was a housewife who raised 6 children in a 3-room apartment. I was the 4th. She was small, wiry, and tireless. She cooked, cleaned, sewed, mediated disputes between us children, stretched money in ways that defied mathematics, and somehow managed to keep the chaos of a 6-child household from descending into anarchy. She was also deeply superstitious. She believed in the evil eye, in jinn, in the power of certain Quranic verses to ward off sickness and bad luck. She would write verses on small pieces of paper, fold them into triangles, and pin them inside our clothes. We were walking amulets. When I was 6 years old, my father decided I would memorize the Quran. This was not unusual in Egypt. A Hafiz, someone who has memorized the entire Quran, is respected, honored, almost revered. For a poor construction worker like my father, having a son who was a Hafiz would elevate the family's status in the neighborhood. It would be proof that despite the poverty, despite the cramped apartment, despite the rough hands and the illiterate mind, the Mansour family was blessed by God. So I was sent to a kutab, a Quranic school, run by a sheikh in our neighborhood. His name was Sheikh Hamdi. He was an old man with a white beard and sharp eyes and a thin wooden stick that he used freely on the backs of boys who made mistakes. I was terrified of him, but I was also terrified of disappointing my father. So I memorized. I memorized with a fervor that surprised everyone, including myself. I had a gift for it. The Arabic words, the rhythms, the melodies of Quranic recitation. They came to me naturally, like music comes naturally to some children. By the time I was 10, I had memorized a third of the Quran. By 12, 2/3. By 14, the entire book. All 114 surahs. All 6,236 verses. Word for word. Letter for letter. Stored in my mind like files in a cabinet. I remember the day I completed the memorization. There was a small celebration at the kutab. Sheikh Hamdi, who had never smiled at me in 8 years, put his hand on my head and said, "This boy has the Quran in his chest. God has chosen him." My father wept. My mother wept. The neighbors brought sweets. For one shining afternoon in Shubra, I was somebody. But here is what I want to tell you, and I want you to listen carefully because this is important. I memorized every word of the Quran, and I understood almost none of it. The Quran is in classical Arabic, a form of the language that is very different from the Egyptian dialect I spoke at home. When I memorized the Quran, I was memorizing sounds, patterns, sequences. I was not engaging with meaning. I could recite Surah Al-Baqarah from beginning to end without a single error. But if you had asked me what it meant, what it was actually saying, I would have given you a vague, second-hand answer borrowed from Sheikh Hamdi's lectures. This is more common than people think. Millions of Muslims around the world memorize the Quran in Arabic without speaking Arabic. They memorize a book in a language they do not understand. They recite it in their prayers, in their daily devotions, in their moments of distress. The sounds are sacred. The meaning is secondary. I did not realize at the time how significant this was. I was a boy. I was proud. I was a Hafiz. God had chosen me. That was enough. But the question that would eventually pull the first brick from the wall of my house was already forming. Somewhere deep in the soil of my young mind, waiting to grow. If I have God's word in my chest, why does my chest still feel empty? I followed the path that was laid out for me. After completing my Quran memorization, I studied at Al-Azhar, the most prestigious Islamic university in the world, right there in Cairo. Al-Azhar is 1,000 years old. Walking through its corridors is like walking through the history of Islamic scholarship. The weight of tradition is palpable. You breathe it in. It settles on your shoulders like a cloak. I studied Islamic jurisprudence, Quranic exegesis, Hadith sciences, Arabic literature, and theology. I was a serious student. Not brilliant. I did not have the intellectual firepower of some of my classmates, but diligent. I showed up. I read. I memorized. I passed exams. I absorbed the vast, intricate, centuries-old architecture of Islamic thought. And I believed, completely, without reservation. Not because I had examined the evidence and reached a conclusion. At that stage, I had not examined anything. But because the system I was embedded in did not encourage examination. It encouraged acceptance, submission. That is the literal meaning of Islam. Submission to God's will. Questioning was not forbidden exactly, but it was discouraged. Questions were seen as signs of weak faith. A strong Muslim did not question. A strong Muslim submitted. At 23, I became an Imam at a small mosque in the Sayyida Zainab neighborhood of Cairo. It was a modest mosque, nothing like the grand mosques you see in tourist photographs. A simple building with a minaret and a prayer hall that could hold about 200 people. But it was mine, my pulpit, my congregation, my responsibility. I took that responsibility seriously. I prepared my Friday sermons with care. I counseled families in crisis. I performed marriages and funerals. I visited the sick. I taught Quran classes for children just as Sheikh Hamdi had taught me, though I left the wooden stick behind. I became a pillar of the community. People called me Sheikh Ibrahim. They sought my advice on everything from marital disputes to business ethics to whether it was permissible to eat at a restaurant that also served alcohol. I was, by all external measures, a successful Muslim clergyman, respected, trusted, established, but inside, and this is the part I have never told anyone before this moment, inside I was struggling. The emptiness I had felt as a 14-year-old Hafiz had not gone away. It had grown. It had become a cavern. I stood on the minbar every Friday and preached about the mercy of Allah, about the beauty of Islam, about the certainty of the faith, and I felt like a man describing a feast to hungry people while his own stomach growled. I prayed 5 times a day. I fasted during Ramadan. I performed Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, twice. I did everything right. I followed every rule. I checked every box. And yet, at the end of the day, when the mosque was empty and the congregation had gone home and I was alone in the prayer hall, I felt nothing. Not peace, not presence, not connection, nothing. Just silence. The same silence you hear when you call someone's name in an empty room and the room does not answer. I was terrified of this feeling. Because if an Imam, a man who has dedicated his life to God, cannot feel God, what does that mean? It could mean one of 2 things. Either something is wrong with the Imam, or something is wrong with the religion, and I was not ready to consider the second possibility. So I concluded that the problem was me. I was not devout enough, I was not sincere enough, I was not pure enough. I needed to try harder, pray longer, fast more, read more Quran, study more Hadith. Surely if I just pushed harder, the connection would come. God would reveal himself, the emptiness would fill. I pushed for 20 years. It never filled. I need to tell you about the wait, because the wait is what eventually broke me, and the breaking is what saved me. When you are an Imam, people bring you their problems. That is part of the job. And I took it seriously. I listened, I counseled, I quoted Quran and Hadith. I gave the answers I had been trained to give. But over the years I began to notice something troubling. The answers I was giving were not helping. A woman came to me whose husband was beating her. I told her to be patient, to pray for her husband's guidance, to try to be a better wife so he would have no reason to be angry. I quoted the Quran and the Hadith about the rights of husbands. She went home and got beaten again. A young man came to me struggling with doubt. He had read something online that challenged his faith and he was confused. I told him that doubt was from Shaitan, that he should stop reading such material, that he should increase his prayers and his Quran recitation. He left looking no less confused than when he arrived. A mother came to me whose teenage son had committed suicide. She was destroyed, shattered, barely functional. She wanted to know if her son was in hell. Islamic theology is complicated on this issue, but the general consensus is that suicide is a major sin. I told her what I had been taught, that we could not know for certain, that we should trust in God's mercy, but that her son had committed a grave act. She left weeping. She never came back to the mosque. Each of these encounters left a mark on me, like scratches on a glass surface. One scratch is barely visible. A dozen scratches and the glass begins to look clouded. 100 scratches, and you can barely see through it. I was the glass, and after 20 years of giving answers that did not heal, after 20 years of watching people come to me in pain and leave in pain, after 20 years of reciting verses that were supposed to be the solution to every problem but somehow never seemed to solve anything, I was clouded. I could barely see. The weight was not just the suffering of others. It was my own suffering too. My marriage had become strained. My wife, Huda, was a good woman, patient, loyal, devoted. But she had married an Imam, and she expected a man of faith, a man of certainty, a man who had answers. What she got increasingly was a man who came home from the mosque with tired eyes and sat in silence staring at the wall. She asked me what was wrong. I said nothing, because how do you tell your wife that the foundation of your entire life, your career, your identity, your community, your belief system, is cracking beneath your feet? My children, I have 2 sons and a daughter, were growing up in the shadow of a father who preached conviction but lived with doubt. They saw me as the man on the minbar, the respected sheikh. They did not see the man who lay awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, whispering to a God who never seemed to whisper back. The weight was also theological. The more I studied, the more I found things in Islamic tradition that troubled me. Not the broad strokes, the monotheism, the call to prayer, the emphasis on charity and justice. Those things are beautiful, and I still believe they have value. What troubled me was the details. The hadith about Muhammad's personal life that raised moral questions I could not answer. The treatment of women in Islamic jurisprudence that I could no longer justify as cultural context. The concept of eternal hellfire for disbelief. The idea that a loving, merciful God would torture people forever, not for being evil, but for being unconvinced. The rigid, legalistic nature of Sharia, which seemed to turn every aspect of human life into a compliance checklist. I felt like I was carrying a backpack filled with stones. Every unanswered question was a stone. Every troubling hadith was a stone. Every person I failed to help was a stone. And the backpack was getting heavier every year, every month, every day. Something had to give. And eventually, something did. When I was 42, I had a conversation that altered the course of my life. It was with a man named Boutros. He was a Coptic Christian, one of Egypt's indigenous Christian minority, which has existed for nearly 2,000 years. Boutros was a pharmacist who owned a small shop near my mosque. We had known each other for years in the way that neighbors know each other in Cairo. Greetings, small talk, occasional favors. He was a quiet, gentle man with gray at his temples and a calm demeanor that I always envied. One evening, I stopped by his pharmacy to buy medicine for a headache. The shop was empty. It was late. We started talking. I do not remember how the conversation turned to deeper things. Maybe it was the weariness in my face. Maybe it was the hour. Maybe it was God. Boutros said something that night that I have replayed in my mind 1,000 times since. We were talking about suffering, about the difficulties in Egypt, the economic struggles, the political tensions, and he said, "Ibrahim, do you know what gives me peace in the middle of all this?" I said, "What?" He said, "I know a God who suffered, not a God who sits above suffering and gives commands about how to endure it. A God who entered it, who lived it, who felt every pain that I feel, and who came out the other side with scars on his hands." Scars on his hands. That image hit me with a force I was not prepared for. A God with scars. Not a God on a distant throne. Not a God who was too holy, too elevated, too transcendent to be touched by pain. A God with scars. A God who had been hurt. A God who understood. I said, almost without thinking, I wish I knew a God like that. And Boutros looked at me, a look of such compassion and understanding that I felt exposed, like he could see through the Imam costume to the empty man underneath. And he said, "You can." I left the pharmacy quickly after that. I was shaking, not from cold, from the earthquake that had just started inside me. 2 words, "You can," had pulled the first brick from the wall. For the next several weeks, I could not get Boutros's words out of my mind. A God who suffered, a God with scars. I tried to push the thoughts away. I preached my sermons. I led my prayers. I counseled my congregation. But underneath it all, like a river running beneath a city, those words flowed. Finally, I went back to Boutros. It was another late evening. The shop was empty again. I stood in the doorway for a long time before I could speak. Then I said, "Tell me about your God." Boutros did not preach. He did not lecture. He did not give me theological arguments or apologetic presentations. He simply told me about Jesus. He told me as if he were telling me about a friend, someone he knew personally, someone he talked to every day, someone who had walked with him through the death of his mother, through financial hardship, through the daily struggle of being a Christian minority in a Muslim majority country. He told me about the cross, about Jesus, the Son of God, hanging on a Roman execution device, bleeding, suffocating, dying, and choosing it, not being forced, choosing, out of love. He told me about the resurrection, about death being swallowed up by life, about the grave being empty, about hope that was not wishful thinking but historical reality, something that actually happened in a real place, at a real time, witnessed by real people. And he told me about grace. That word, grace, was foreign to my vocabulary. In Islam, I knew mercy. Rahmah. God is merciful. But mercy in Islam is conditional. God shows mercy to whom He wills. You hope for mercy, but you cannot be certain of it. Grace was different. Grace, as Boutros described it, was unconditional, unearned, undeserved, given freely to anyone who would receive it. Not because they had performed well enough. Not because their good deeds outweighed their bad deeds, but because God's nature is to give. Period. I sat in that pharmacy for 3 hours. Boutros gave me tea. He answered my questions with patience and honesty. When I asked difficult questions, about the Trinity, about the divinity of Christ, about the supposed contradictions in the Bible, he did not give me slick answers. Sometimes he said, "I do not fully understand that myself, but I trust the one who does." And that honesty, that willingness to say, "I do not know," without panic or defensiveness, was more convincing to me than any argument could have been. Before I left, Boutros gave me something. He reached under the counter and pulled out a small book, a New Testament in Arabic. He said, "Read this. Start with the Gospel of John, and when you are done, come back, and we will talk." I took the book. I hid it inside my briefcase beneath a stack of sermon notes. The irony was not lost on me, an imam smuggling a Bible past his own congregation. That night, after Huda and the children were asleep, I sat in my study, the small room in our apartment where I prepared my sermons, and I opened the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through Him all things were made. Without Him nothing was made that has been made. In Him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. I read those words and I felt the ground shift beneath me. Not the physical ground, the ground of my entire worldview. Everything I had built my life on. 42 years of Islamic belief, 20 years of preaching, a lifetime of certainty, trembled. Because these words were not the words of a corrupted, distorted, unreliable book. These words were alive. They pulsed with a truth that I recognized in my bones. The way you recognize your mother's voice in a crowd. I had been told my entire life that the Bible was corrupted, that it could not be trusted, that the Quran had corrected all its errors. But the words I was reading did not feel corrupted. They felt like the purest, clearest, most honest thing I had ever read. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. I was sitting in darkness. I had been sitting in darkness for decades, and something was shining. For the next 9 months, I read the New Testament. Slowly, carefully, the way a man handles something precious and dangerous. I read it in my study after everyone was asleep. I read it on my phone during quiet moments at the mosque. The supreme irony, an imam reading the Bible in a mosque. I read it in coffee shops, hiding it behind a newspaper. I read it on park benches, in taxis, in the bathroom with the door locked. And as I read, the house of my beliefs continued to collapse. It was not a sudden demolition. It was gradual, like erosion. Each chapter of the New Testament was like water flowing over stone, slowly wearing away the surface, revealing what was underneath. And what was underneath, to my astonishment, was not nothing. It was bedrock, a foundation that was stronger and more solid than anything I had built in 42 years of Islam. I want to describe the unraveling, because it was not just intellectual. It was emotional, it was spiritual, it was physical. My body changed during those 9 months. I lost weight. I could not sleep. My hands shook. I had headaches that no amount of Boutros's pharmacy medicine could cure. The stress of living 2 lives, Imam by day, secret Bible reader by night, was destroying me from the inside. But there were also moments of extraordinary beauty. Moments when I would read a passage and feel a warmth spread through my chest that was unlike anything I had experienced in decades of Islamic worship. Moments when the words of Jesus would answer a question I had been carrying for years. And the answer was so simple, so obvious, so right, that I would laugh out loud in disbelief that I had not seen it before. One of those moments came when I read Matthew chapter 11. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Weary and burdened. That was me. I was the weariest, most burdened man in Cairo. And here was Jesus, not Allah, not a distant deity, but Jesus, a person, a real person with a real voice, saying, "Come, let me carry that. Let me take the weight. You do not have to do this alone." I wept. Not for the first time during those 9 months, and not for the last. But this weeping was different. It was the weeping of a man who has been lost in a desert for decades and has finally found water. Not a mirage, real water, cool and clear and life-giving. Another moment came when I read the story of the woman caught in adultery in John chapter 8. The religious leaders brought her to Jesus ready to stone her, and they asked him what should be done. And Jesus knelt down and wrote in the dirt. The Bible does not tell us what he wrote. And then he said, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." One by one they dropped their stones and walked away. And Jesus looked at the woman and said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go now and leave your life of sin." I thought about all the people who had come to me over the years, carrying their shame, their failures, their brokenness. The beaten wife, the doubting young man, the grieving mother. They had come to me looking for mercy. And what had I given them? Rules, verses, judgments, the stones of religious obligation disguised as pastoral care. Jesus dropped the stones. He did not excuse the sin. He said, "Leave your life of sin." But he started with compassion, not condemnation. He started with grace, not law. And in that order, grace first, then transformation, I saw a wisdom that was completely absent from my 20 years of Islamic ministry. I had been doing it backwards. I had been demanding transformation first and offering grace second, or not at all. And the result was a congregation full of people who were performing righteousness without experiencing love. I need to stop here for a moment, because if you are watching this, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever felt the weight I am describing? The weight of trying to be good enough for God? The weight of performing your faith instead of living it? The weight of giving answers that you are not sure you believe? If you have, you are not alone. And this story is for you. If these words are reaching something inside you, leave a comment below. You do not have to explain yourself. You do not have to share your whole story. Just say, "I feel the weight." That is enough. And subscribe to this channel because every story we share here is a story about how the weight gets lifted. Let me continue. There is a moment in every convert's story when the internal shift becomes irreversible, when you cross a line that you cannot uncross. For me, that moment happened in the one place you would least expect, inside my own mosque. It was a Friday. I had just finished leading Jumu'ah prayers. The congregation had filed out. I was alone in the prayer hall. The late afternoon light was coming through the windows, casting long golden rectangles on the carpet. The room smelled of incense and sweat and the leather of old Qurans. I stood there in the mihrab, the niche in the wall that indicates the direction of Mecca, and I felt the full weight of my duplicity. For months I had been standing in this spot, leading Muslims in prayer to Allah, while my heart was being pulled toward Jesus. I was a fraud. The most trusted man in the community was the least honest. I sank to my knees. Not in the Islamic prostration, the sujud, that I had performed hundreds of thousands of times. I sank to my knees in surrender. Total, complete, unconditional surrender. Not to Allah, not to Islam, to Jesus. And I prayed the most honest prayer of my life. I said, Jesus, I am a broken man. I have spent my entire life serving a religion, and I have never known God. I have memorized a book, and it left me empty. I have preached to others, and I could not save myself. I am tired. I am so tired. I have nothing to offer you except my exhaustion and my honesty. If you are who the Bible says you are, if you are the way, the truth, and the life, then I surrender. I give up trying. I give up performing. I give up pretending. Take me as I am, or leave me here on this floor. I stayed on that floor for a long time. The light shifted. The shadows lengthened. The mosque grew darker. And in the darkness, in the silence, in the emptiness of that prayer hall where I had spent 20 years of my life, I felt a presence. Not a feeling, not an emotion. A presence, a person. Someone was in the room with me. Not physically visible, not audible in the ordinary sense, but real. More real than the carpet under my knees. More real than the walls around me. More real than anything I had ever experienced in my life. And this presence was not distant. It was not watching me from above. It was not judging me. It was beside me, close, intimate, tender, like a father kneeling next to a child who has fallen and is crying. In that presence I heard, not with my ears but with something deeper, a single sentence, I have been waiting for you. I have been waiting for you. Not, where have you been? Not, why did it take so long? Not, you should have come sooner. Just, I have been waiting, as if the entire 42 years of my life, the memorization, the studying, the preaching, the doubting, the suffering, the searching, had been a long, winding road leading to this exact moment, this exact spot, this floor in this mosque, and Jesus had been standing at the end of the road the entire time, patient, unhurried, waiting. I do not know how long I stayed on that floor. When I finally stood up, my knees ached, my face was wet, and I was a different man. Not a better man. I was still the same broken, confused, exhausted Ibrahim, but a different man. A man who had stopped running. A man who had been caught. A man who was held. I walked out of the mosque that evening and the streets of Cairo looked different. The same chaos, the same noise, the same smog, the same honking, but different. Like someone had turned up the saturation on the world. Colors were brighter, sounds were clearer. The faces of strangers were more vivid, more beautiful, more precious. I was seeing the world through new eyes, not my eyes, his eyes. Now I was in the most impossible situation imaginable. I was an imam, a practicing, employed, respected imam. I stood on the minbar every Friday and preached Islam. I led daily prayers. I taught Quran classes. I counseled Muslims. I was the spiritual leader of a community that trusted me completely. And I was a Christian. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. Every time I stood up to preach, I felt physically ill. Every time I led the congregation in saying, Allahu Akbar, God is greatest, I wanted to add, and His name is Jesus. Every time I opened the Quran to teach, my mind would involuntarily compare what I was reading with what I had read in the New Testament, and the comparison was devastating. I could not keep this up. I knew that. But I also could not simply resign. In Egypt, an imam resigning from his position raises questions. An imam leaving Islam is not just a personal decision. It is a scandal, a crime in the eyes of many, a betrayal that would ripple through the entire community. And the consequences were not abstract. Egypt has blasphemy laws. Social ostracism of apostates is severe. Violence is not unheard of. And beyond the legal and social consequences, there was my family. Huda, my wife, was the daughter of a sheikh. She had married me in part because I was an imam. Our entire social circle was Islamic. Our children attended Islamic schools. Our identity, our community, our livelihood, everything depended on me being who I had always been. I went to Boutros. I told him everything, the prayer in the mosque, the presence I had felt, the words I had heard. He listened with tears in his eyes. Then he said, Ibrahim, you are a follower of Jesus now, but you need to be wise. Do not rush. God has been patient with you for 42 years. He will be patient a little longer. Boutros connected me with a small group of believers, former Muslims like me, who were living as secret Christians in Cairo. There were about 8 of them. They met in Boutros's apartment above the pharmacy on Sunday evenings, with the doors locked and the curtains drawn. The first time I attended one of those meetings, I was overwhelmed. Here were people, Egyptians like me from Muslim backgrounds like me, who had made the same impossible choice, a retired school teacher, a taxi driver, a young woman who worked in a bank, a married couple in their 30s, each of them carrying the same dual identity, the same secret, the same weight. But there was no weight in that room. When we gathered, when we sang, quietly, always quietly, when we prayed, when we read scripture together, the weight was gone. In its place was something I can only call lightness, the lightness of truth, the lightness of being known, the lightness of worshiping a God who did not demand performance but offered presence. I looked around that small room, at those 8 faces lit by a single lamp, and I thought of the early church, the book of Acts. Small groups of believers meeting in homes, sharing bread, praying, living in the dangerous joy of a faith that the empire wanted to destroy. 2,000 years later, nothing had changed. The empire had a different name, but the dynamic was the same. And the joy was the same. I knew I had to tell my wife. I could not continue lying to the person I shared a bed with, a home with, children with. The deception was corroding everything. I spent weeks preparing. Not preparing a speech. I am an Imam. I know how to give speeches. Preparing my heart. Preparing for the possibility that the woman I loved would look at me with horror. Preparing for the possibility of losing my family. I chose a quiet evening. The children were at my mother-in-law's house for the night. Huda and I were alone. She was sitting on the sofa watching television. The sounds of a Cairo evening drifted through the open window. Traffic, a distant call to Isha prayer, a neighbor's radio. I sat down next to her and turned off the television. She looked at me, startled. I said, "Huda, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to all of it before you respond." Her face tightened. She knew. Women always know when something is coming. She nodded. I told her. All of it. The emptiness, the decades of doubt, Boutros, the Bible, the prayer in the mosque, Jesus. I spoke for over an hour, and she did not interrupt once. She sat perfectly still, her hands clasped in her lap, her face unreadable. When I finished, the silence was so complete that I could hear the blood pulsing in my ears. Then Huda spoke, and what she said was not what I expected. She said, "I know." I stared at her. "What?" "I know, Ibrahim. I have known for months. You talk in your sleep. You say his name, Jesus. You say it over and over, and I have seen the change in you. You come home from the mosque looking broken, but then you go to your study, and when you come out, you are different, lighter, softer. I did not know what was happening, but I knew something was. I was speechless. She had known. She had been watching. She had been silently processing the transformation of her husband without saying a word. She looked at me with eyes full of something I could not immediately identify. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was grief. Deep, quiet grief. The grief of a woman whose entire world was being rewritten in front of her. She said, "Ibrahim, I do not know what to do with this. I am the daughter of a sheikh. I am the wife of an imam. My entire identity is built on Islam. If you leave Islam, what happens to me? What happens to our children? What happens to everything we have built?" I said, "I do not know, but I cannot pretend anymore. I have been pretending for 20 years, and it is killing me." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that showed me the depth of her character, the quality of her heart. She said, "I need time. I am not saying no. I am not saying yes. I am saying I need time. Can you give me that?" I said, "Of course." She stood up, walked to the bedroom and closed the door. I heard her crying through the wall. Soft, muffled sobs that went on for a long time. I sat on the sofa and cried too. 2 people separated by a wall and a belief system crying for the same thing. A future they could not see. The next year was the most complex of my life. Not the hardest. The hardest was the decade of emptiness. But the most complex. Because I was simultaneously ending one life and beginning another. And the 2 lives overlapped in ways that were agonizing. I began a quiet, gradual process of stepping back from my role as Imam. I did not resign dramatically. I did not make an announcement. I started citing health issues, which were not entirely fabricated, given the weight loss, the insomnia, the stress. I reduced my responsibilities. I trained a young man, a bright theology student named Youssef, to take on more of the preaching and teaching duties. I delegated. I faded. The congregation noticed. People asked if I was okay. I said I was dealing with health issues and family matters. They prayed for me. The irony of being prayed for by Muslims while I was secretly following Jesus was almost unbearable. These were good people, kind people, people who genuinely cared about me, and I was deceiving them. But I could not tell them the truth. Not yet. Not in Egypt. Not while my family was still here, still vulnerable, still embedded in the community. During this time, something remarkable happened with Huda. She started reading the Bible. Not because I asked her to. I had not pushed her at all. I had respected her request for time. But one evening, about 3 months after my confession, I came home and found her in my study, holding the New Testament that Boutros had given me. She looked up at me and said, "I want to understand what you see in this." I sat down next to her. She had the book open to the Gospel of Luke, the parable of the prodigal son, of all things. She pointed to the verse where the father runs to meet the son, and she said, "Is this what God is like? This is what you believe?" I said, "Yes." She stared at the page for a long time. Then she said very quietly, "I wish our God ran." Our God. She still said our God, meaning the Islamic God. But the wish? "I wish our God ran," told me that something was stirring in her heart. The same crack that had formed in my wall was forming in hers. Over the following months, Huda read the New Testament from beginning to end. She did not tell me she was doing it. I only knew because I noticed the book moving from one part of my study to another. The bookmark advancing steadily through the pages. I said nothing. I prayed. One morning, about 7 months after my confession, Huda came to me at breakfast and said simply, "I believe." 2 words. The most beautiful 2 words I have ever heard. She said, "I have been fighting it. I have been telling myself it is wrong, it is dangerous, it is a mistake. But I cannot fight anymore. I read about Jesus, and I see someone I want to follow. Someone who does not require me to earn his love. Someone who gives it freely. I want that, Ibrahim. I have wanted it my whole life. I just did not know it existed." We held each other and wept. In that embrace, in that kitchen, surrounded by the morning sounds of Cairo, 2 people who had spent their entire lives in Islam found themselves in the arms of Christ and in the arms of each other. And the relief, the staggering, indescribable relief of not being alone in this anymore, was the greatest gift I have ever received. I am going to pause for a moment because this part of the story means everything to me. When I decided to follow Jesus, I was prepared to lose my wife. I was prepared to lose my family. I was prepared to walk this road alone. And God, in His infinite kindness, gave me a companion. He did not have to. Many converts lose their spouses, many walk alone. But God gave me Huda. And that gift humbles me every single day. If you are married and your spouse does not share your faith, or if you are carrying a secret that you are afraid to share with the person closest to you, I want you to know that God is bigger than your fear. I am not saying it will be easy. I am not saying it will turn out the way mine did. But I am saying that God is faithful, and His faithfulness does not depend on our circumstances. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that. And stay with me. There is more to tell. The decision to leave Egypt was not ours alone. It was made for us, in a sense, by circumstances beyond our control. About 2 years after my conversion, my gradual withdrawal from the mosque had attracted attention. Not from the government, at least not directly, but from the community. People were talking. Why had Sheikh Ibrahim stepped back? Why was he no longer preaching? Why had he become so reclusive? And then someone noticed that Boutros, the Coptic pharmacist, had been visiting our apartment. In a neighborhood where everyone watches everyone, a frequent visitor from the Christian minority raised questions. Rumors started. I do not know exactly what was said, but I know that the word convert was whispered. In Egypt, that word is a lit match near gasoline. One morning I found a note slipped under our apartment door. It said in Arabic, "We know what you have become. Repent or face the consequences." No signature, no name, just a threat. I showed it to Huda. We looked at each other and we both knew. It was time to leave. Boutros helped us connect with an organization that assists persecuted believers. The process was complex and frightening. We had to be careful about passports, about travel arrangements, about money. We had to decide what to tell our children, who were teenagers by then, and still did not know the full truth. We told them the night before we left. All 3 of them sitting in our living room, the same living room where Huda had first held the New Testament. We told them that we were followers of Jesus. We told them that we were leaving Egypt. We told them that we were sorry for the disruption, for the upheaval, for the loss of everything familiar. and we told them that we loved them more than anything in the world, and that we believed, with every ounce of our being, that we were walking towards something good. My oldest son, Ahmed, who was 17, was angry. He did not understand. He said, "You were an Imam, Baba. How can you leave Islam? What about everything you taught us?" I said, "Ahmed, everything I taught you about honesty, about integrity, about seeking truth even when it is difficult, that is exactly what I am doing now. I am seeking truth, and truth led me here." My daughter Mariam, who was 15, cried. She was scared. She did not want to leave her friends, her school, her life. My youngest son, Sami, who was 13, was quiet. He looked at me with steady eyes and said, "Baba, are you sure?" I said, "Yes, Sami, I am sure." He nodded. "Then I trust you." That simple trust from a 13-year-old boy gave me the courage I needed to walk out the door. We left Cairo the next morning. We took a flight to a transit country, and from there, with the help of the organization, we made our way to a European country where we were granted asylum as persecuted religious minorities. I will not describe the journey in detail. It was stressful, complicated, and at times frightening. But through every step, every airport, every border crossing, every moment of uncertainty, I felt the presence that I had first encountered on the floor of my mosque, walking with us, going before us, whispering, "I have been waiting for you, and now we walk together." Starting over at 45 is not the same as starting over at 25. At 25, you have energy, adaptability, the resilience of youth. At 45, you have a bad back, 3 children who are grieving the loss of their homeland, a wife who is processing an entirely new reality, and the knowledge that the career you spent 2 decades building is gone. Completely, irrecoverably gone. I could not be an imam anymore, obviously, and my skills, Quranic memorization, Islamic jurisprudence, Arabic rhetoric, were not exactly in high demand in a European job market. I was, at 45, essentially starting from zero. The first year was brutal. Language classes, government paperwork, job applications that went nowhere, a small apartment provided by the refugee services. The cold weather. After a lifetime in Cairo, the cold was physical shock. Huda cooked Egyptian food in our tiny kitchen, trying to recreate the smells and tastes of home. And sometimes the familiarity of those flavors was comforting, and sometimes it was devastating, because it reminded us of everything we had left behind. My children struggled. Ahmed, the angry one, became angrier. He blamed me for uprooting the family. He said, "You destroyed our lives for your new religion." Those words cut deep. They cut deep because part of me feared he was right. Part of me, in the darkest moments, wondered if I had made a catastrophic mistake. If I had sacrificed my family's happiness for a conviction that might be nothing more than a midlife crisis. But Huda held me together. She had become, in the years since her conversion, a woman of extraordinary faith. She prayed with a confidence that put my own prayers to shame. She read the Bible daily. She found a church community faster than I did, bonding with other women, learning the language with determination, anchoring herself in her new faith while everything else was shifting. She would find me in those dark moments, sitting alone, staring at nothing, the weight of doubt pressing down. And she would take my hand and say, "Ibrahim, remember the mosque. Remember the floor. Remember the voice." He said, "I have been waiting for you." He is not done waiting. He is here. He is now. And I would remember. And the darkness would lift. Not completely, not permanently, but enough. Enough to get up. Enough to keep going. Enough to believe that God had not brought us this far to abandon us. Slowly, things improved. I found work as an Arabic language teacher. My skills were useful after all, not the Islamic scholarship, but the Arabic. There was demand for Arabic teachers in the refugee community and in the local education system. I started teaching and discovered that I loved it. Not the teaching of doctrine as I had done in the mosque, but the teaching of language, of communication, of connection, of the ability to express yourself and be understood. There was something beautifully simple about teaching someone to say good morning in Arabic. The church community we joined was diverse and welcoming. There were Europeans, Africans, Asians, Middle Easterners, other converts from Islam, other refugees, other people who had lost everything and found something. We worshiped together every Sunday, and the worship was loud and free and full of joy. And every time I lifted my voice in song, I thought of those 20 years of silent doubt in the mosque, and I marveled at the contrast. Ahmed gradually softened. Not quickly. It took years. But as he watched his parents' faith, As he saw the peace and the purpose and the love that defined our new life, his anger cooled. He started asking questions. Not hostile questions, genuine ones. He started attending church. He started reading the Bible. One evening, about 2 years after we arrived in Europe, Ahmed knocked on our bedroom door. It was late. Huda and I were reading. He came in and sat on the edge of the bed and said, "I have been thinking about what you said, about seeking truth. And I think I want to seek it too." Huda and I looked at each other. Then we looked at our son, and we saw it. The same crack in the wall that had formed in both of us. The same hunger, the same thirst. The beginning of the same journey. We did not push. We did not preach. We just said, "We are here. Whenever you are ready." Ahmed was baptized 6 months later. Mariam followed a year after that. Sami, my quiet, trusting youngest, he had been reading the Bible on his own for months without telling anyone. And when he finally told us, he said, "I have believed since Cairo. I just was not ready to say it out loud." My entire family, all 5 of us, followers of Jesus. When I think about that, when I truly sit with it, when I let the magnitude of it wash over me, I am undone. Because I had been prepared to lose them all. I had braced for rejection, for separation, for the lifelong grief of a father whose family could not follow where he went. And instead, God gave me this. A family united in faith, not despite the hardship, but through it. Forged in the fire of displacement and doubt and darkness, and emerging on the other side together, whole, held. I am 48, not old by most standards, but I feel old. The years of internal conflict, the stress of the double life, the upheaval of immigration, they have aged me. My hair is more gray than black. My face has lines that were not there 5 years ago. My back aches in the cold weather. I am, by all appearances, an ordinary middle-aged man in a European city, going about his ordinary life. But inside, I am anything but ordinary. Inside, I am a man who has seen both sides of the mountain. I have stood on the Islamic side, with its grandeur and its tradition, and its billion-plus adherents, and its 14 centuries of history. And I have walked down that side and climbed the other, the Christian side, with its cross and its grace and its scandalous claim that God became a man and died and rose again. I have seen both. And I have chosen. Let me tell you what I have learned. Not theology, not apologetics, not arguments for or against either religion. I have learned something simpler and more important than any of that. I have learned that God is not a concept, He is a person. And persons are known through relationship, not through study. You can study a person your entire life, read their biography, analyze their words, examine their actions, and still not know them. Knowing comes through encounter, through presence. Through the terrifying intimacy of being with someone and letting them be with you. For 42 years I studied God. I memorized His book. I analyzed His laws. I taught His theology. But I did not know Him. I knew about Him. I did not know Him. When I knelt on the floor of that mosque and surrendered to Jesus, I stopped studying and started meeting. I stopped performing and started being. I stopped trying to earn my way into God's presence and discovered that He was already present, already close. Already running toward me. That is the difference. That is everything. Not Islam versus Christianity. Not the Quran versus the Bible. Not Muhammad versus Jesus. Those debates have their place. But the real difference, the one that matters, the one that changed my life, is this. I went from knowing about God to knowing God. From religion to relationship. From the house to the home. I have also learned that loss is not the end of the story. I lost my career. I lost my country. I lost my community. I lost 20 years of work and reputation and identity. And for a while, the loss was all I could see. It filled my vision. It defined me. I was Ibrahim, the man who lost everything. But loss, I have discovered, is a doorway. On the other side of everything I lost, I found everything I had been looking for. Peace, presence, purpose, love. A God who does not keep score but keeps promises. A family that chose truth over comfort. A new community of believers who welcome me not as a sheikh, but as a brother. The Apostle Paul wrote, "I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them garbage, that I may gain Christ." I understand those words now. Not as theology, as autobiography. If you are Muslim, I want to speak to you with the respect that you deserve. You are not my enemy. You are my former family. I walked your streets. I prayed your prayers. I memorized your book. I know your world from the inside, and there is much in it that is good and beautiful and worthy of respect. But I want to ask you a question. The same question that started everything for me. Do you know God? Not do you know about Him. Do you know Him? When you pray, do you feel a presence? When you worship, do you encounter a person? Or are you, like I was for 42 years, going through the motions of a faith that fills your schedule but not your soul? If you are full, if you are satisfied, if your faith gives you everything you need, then I am happy for you. I mean that. But if there is a hunger, a restlessness, an emptiness that all your devotion cannot fill, then I want you to know that the hunger is not a weakness. It is an invitation. It is God, the real God, the God who has scars on His hands, calling you to something deeper. If you are a Christian who was born into your faith, I want to challenge you. Do not take your inheritance for granted. You have the Bible in your language, on your phone, in your bookstore. You have churches on every corner. You have the freedom to worship openly. Do not let familiarity breed indifference. The grace you have been given is the same grace that people in Egypt, in Iran, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan are risking their lives to receive. Honor it. Live it. Share it. And if you are anyone, of any faith or no faith, who has been carrying a weight, I want to say this. You do not have to carry it alone. That is the message of the cross. God saw humanity staggering under the weight of sin and guilt and shame and fear, and He did not shout instructions from above. He came down. He took the weight. He carried it to the cross and He left it there. And then He rose, weightless, free, and offered that freedom to anyone who would take it. You do not have to perform. You do not have to earn. You do not have to be good enough. You just have to come. Weary, burdened, empty, broken. Come as you are, and He will give you rest. My name is Ibrahim Mansour. I am 48 years old. I was born in Shubra, Cairo. I was a Hafiz. I was an Imam. I was a man who spent his entire life in a house built on sand and did not know it until the house fell. And when the house fell, I expected to find nothing underneath. I expected rubble. I expected ruin. Instead, I found bedrock. I found a foundation that cannot be shaken. I found a God with scars on His hands and love in His eyes and a voice that said, I have been waiting for you. 6 years later, I am still walking, still learning, still being rebuilt. The process is not complete. I am not a finished product. I am a man in progress, a house under construction, a story still being written. But the architect is good. The foundation is solid, and the door is always open. If you have stayed with me through this entire story, I want to say thank you. You have given me something precious, your time, your attention, your willingness to listen to a middle-aged Egyptian man talk about the most important thing that ever happened to him. I do not take that lightly. I know your time is valuable. I know there are a million other things you could be watching right now. But you chose this. And maybe that choice was not accidental. Maybe like the conversation with Boutros in a quiet pharmacy on a Cairo evening, this moment was arranged by a God who is very good at arranging things. If Ibrahim's story resonated with you, if you felt something while listening, if a word or a moment or an image stuck with you, please do 3 things for me. First, leave a comment. Tell me what moved you. Tell me your own story if you want. Or just say, I was here. Every comment tells us that these testimonies matter. Second, share this video. Send it to someone. Post it somewhere. You do not know who needs to hear this today. Maybe there is an Imam somewhere, sitting alone in an empty mosque, feeling the weight. Maybe this video will find him. Third, subscribe to this channel. We are building something here. A collection of real stories from real people who found real hope in the most unexpected places. Your subscription helps us reach more people. And reaching people is what this is all about. Thank you, friends. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being here. My name is Ibrahim, and this is my testimony. May the God with scars on His hands bless you today and always.